Let's hit it. And welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort. All right, here we go. What you think about, you will bring about. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome back to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm really excited about this show because I am a firm believer of preparing for end of life and to try to get this conversation out in the world so people aren't so afraid. But before I introduce our guest, I just, again, want to welcome you all to the show. And if you liked our opening music, it's called Clarion Call, and it was performed and written by the Mark Arneson Band here in Minnesota, which I just love, and you can download that on any of your favorite music platforms. For those of you that are new to our show, Alzheimer Speaks Radio is about sound information, not just sound bites. We like to have a real conversation. So we're going to talk for an hour with our guests, and we talk to people all around the world, big and small, from those living with a form of dementia to family members, to professionals, to researchers, businesses, authors, movie directors, singer-songwriters. Everyone is welcome here. I think the more we can have conversation, the more we can learn, the more we can give hope and be inspired to all live well alongside this disease. Now, I do want to give a couple of shout-outs, and one is to Arthur's Memory Cafe. Arthur's Senior Care sponsors us, and we get together virtually the second and the fourth Wednesday of each month at 1 o'clock Central Time, so that would be 2 o'clock Eastern Time. And also, we have an in-person meeting for what we call Caregiver Connect that is sponsored by Brookdale North Oaks, and we meet the last Wednesday of each month at 10 a.m. at the Shoreview Parks and Rec Community Center, and you can find more information about those by going to alzheimerspeaks.com, or feel free to email me as well at radio@alzheimerspeaks. Now, I also want to share with you that you can now join a really important Alzheimer's disease research project in minutes from your home, and it's called Picnic Health. And all you have to do is go to picnichealth.com/speaks, and you can sign up, and you'll get $25 just for doing that. What Picnic Health does is they collect and they digitize all of your medical records into one online account. And then with your consent, they share that monetized data of your records with medical researchers. And you see, by examining this real-life data from people's medical records, researchers can find answers that they couldn't find in clinical trials. So it's really important that people participate in this because everybody's journey is unique. So feel free to share your story. Again, you can go to picnichealth.com/speaks. And if you care for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, you can go and sign up on their behalf, again, and as long as you manage their medical records and have right to do so. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you about Dementia Map? We are really excited. We are growing every single day. Dementia Map is a resource for everything dementia all around the world, from big to small. Budget is not an issue. There's no fee to access this. It has resources in a resource directory, an events calendar, terminology, and a wonderful blog where you can get great information from experts in the industry. We are going to listen to the footbar walker, which is absolutely fabulous, and they have a sale going on right now, so you can get this walker for under $200, and it reduces injuries. I just love it, but I will let them do the talking.
Introducing the life-changing footbar walker.
I'm Peggy from Danville, Kentucky, and I'm 91 years old. The footbar walker revolutionized my care of George. The saving that I made from having to put him in a nursing home came to about $192,000. The footbar walker opens and closes just like a standard walker. The only thing that is different is the top bar and the foot bar. Does that ever make a difference?
Does someone you love use a walker? Do they struggle to get up from a seated position? Are you a caregiver dealing with physical pain and stress as you help your patient? The footbar walker was designed to assist not only the patient, but also the caregiver. Patients have more control standing up, and no lifting from the caregiver is required. See how it works at thefootbarwalker.com. That's thefootbarwalker.com. Peggy, would you recommend the footbar walker?
Do I ever? I would not be in the health that I'm in today at this age had it not been for the footbar walker.
I do. I really love that thing. They sent me one out to be able to test it, and it really is quite fabulous, and an easy design, and no shipping, no nothing right now. You can check them out, actually. You can either go to thefootballwalker.com or head over to Dementia Map and look for them there, and you'll be able to get that discount code. Now, today, I am so thrilled to have Wendy Longacre Brown with us, and she is a trained and certified End of Life Doula and a life legacy creator. And some of you might be wondering, what the heck are both of those? Well, we're going to find out today. She provides emotional support, education, and spiritual support. She creates these life legacy projects and works with individuals to truly honor their path today or at the end of life. So welcome, Wendy. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Lori. That was a lovely introduction with the music, too. I have to say, that was the most spirited. You must like attending rock concerts, or you have a little bit of a rockabilly in you, I think.
I like a little bit of everything, actually, so I'm pretty easily pleased when it comes to music.
Great.
But again, thank you for taking time to be with us today. You know, before I kind of get into my line of questions, I always ask everybody if they've been personally touched in their own family or circle of friends by dementia.
Yes, I actually have been touched. It started about 10 years ago when it was clear that my uncle had some form of dementia, which we watched him deteriorate over about 5 years. He died just about 5 years ago right now. And then my mother was diagnosed 2.5 years ago with dementia as well, with Alzheimer's. And I'll talk about her a little bit later and how she's deciding to go forward in life with this disease. But it's a very personal disease, and the network of support, I think, is so incredibly important to share with this small community and larger community. So thank you for your work in that.
Yeah, well, as you know, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years, so I totally get what a difficult route this can be, and yet there's so many things out there to support people that they don't know about, and that's why I'm so thrilled to have you on the show with us today. So, again, thank you for coming. Why don't we start with what the heck is an end-of-life doula? Because I'm sure a lot of people don't even know anything about, what your role is.
Many don't. And the first time I heard about a death doula, it was actually from my sister, who is a birth doula, so I could translate it fairly quickly to what the death doula support looks like. But the easiest way to look at it is the end-of-life doula or death doula is a non-medical person who provides educational, emotional, physical, and or spiritual support to dying people and their caregivers and families. I would say death doulas are comfortable with our own mortality, as we're not afraid to talk about death or people who are dying. Being a doula is an active practice and requires intention and focus and energy, but we're very much, I'd say, holding space and a sounding board for families in crisis. One way, too, to understand what we are is people are often confused, well, what's the difference between hospice and end-of-life doulas? And to start, doulas are very supportive regarding hospice. We do not take place of hospice or palliative care, but we truly only enhance and complement the care for our clients. Hospice prescribes medication. A doula does not ever prescribe medication. I'd say I've seen enough studies that show working with a doula builds confidence towards using hospice earlier than planned because the discussion is open. The sooner the doula can enter the process, the more time that can be spent getting to know the client and the family, create a care plan, prioritize end-of-life needs, and potentially bring in hospice sooner than later, as I said. So a doula's work can begin before hospice is in place, and I think that's one important part. There can be a diagnosis, yet it might not be projected 6 months before a physician feels as though one may die. So a doula's work can begin earlier, and also a doula's present a bit more frequently than hospice. Hospice, they play many different roles, but they have limited time because they often have a certain amount of people they're seeing, and they only can give a certain amount of hours per week to a client.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I know hospice has changed a lot. I mean, when my dad died in 2001, they were present with the family a lot more than when my mom passed away in 2014. I mean, it was like night and day. And so having that extra support, I think is absolutely huge factor for families and how they cope and process things. Now, how the heck did you get into this? Because, so many people are fearful of death to begin with. So, what was your journey to land here?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I had a different career in my 20s and 30s and early 40s as a video and film producer, and then had my own blog all about handwriting. I've always been a believer of journaling and letter writing. And then I paused, busy with 3 children. And when I was pausing, my uncle died from Alzheimer's, and then my sister lost a child in utero. And I had been comfortable with talking about death all of my life, I assumed. My mother and uncle lost their parents in the largest plane crash in the world in 1977 in Tenerife, and that was always discussed. It was emotions were never hidden behind closets. It was an open platform. Yet I found it so interesting that I myself had such a lack of knowledge around how to speak about death, and I am a bit of a people pleaser in certain extent, so I wouldn't necessarily want to bring up death in a surrounding environment where maybe a friend's sister had just lost a child, or I didn't even know how much my sister wanted to talk about it, when really all they want to do is talk about it often. So there was this clear need to befriend the conversation about end of life and the options around this time. Also, ironically, I took this course called Speaking of Dying, which was based out of Seattle, but a friend of mine, Laurel Rydell, who was actually my midwife for my last 2 children, she is a facilitator to this 4-session program, and it's this incredible workshop where you're looking at your healthcare directive and you're thinking of all these scenarios that could be surrounding end-of-life choices for you, such as who will be my advocate and what happens if I have unexpected death. And it just opened this conversation up wider about the options at the end of life. I had never thought, oh, well, if something happened to me tomorrow, actually that is not a bad idea to have my body in a wooden casket in my home so my family and friends can grieve in person together and be in touch with those raw emotions, which really helps the process begin and is supportive for the family members. And even if something happened where I was held on to life for just a little bit longer, I would want to be home and not in a hospital. So these kind of topics came up, and I knew that there was a place for me in death, and I just wasn't sure what that was. And it was really my sister who said, there are end-of-life doulas. And right away I thought, that is very interesting to me, and I think that feels very natural for me to go into. So I started researching. There's many different death doula programs out there. I gravitated to INELDA, which is the International End of Life Doula Association. It's INELDA. The founder, Henry Fresco Weiss, he wrote this incredible book called Caring for Dying. So it was a bit like my Bible. I found myself highlighting every other line, and then I just thought, well, this is something that is obviously valuable as a resource to myself and other people. And if I don't become a doula, I at least want this knowledge to be able to be there for other people. And a little bit about Henry, he was a hospice volunteer who had noticed that families were not present, really emotionally present at death, and he saw that there was unnecessary hospitalization and just this higher anxiety level and fear. And he had been familiar with birth doulas, so he believed that the philosophy and approach around birth doulas could apply to death. And so that's when he began this INELDA program. And right away he noticed that the patient satisfaction went up when a doula was involved, that these doulas were really another set of eyes and ears for the family, and the staff knows that they will be given important information about patient situations. So it's something where it's another communicator. And so I thought this could be something for me. And as far as taking the course, I decided to get myself involved in death, like face to face, before I took the training, just to make sure I still was comfortable. So I started volunteering with Fairview Hospice and Our Lady of Peace and NC Little Hospice, and they're all very different kinds of organizations. But then I knew that I would. Obviously, there are moments that I haven't been in that will throw me, and I'll have to compose myself and dig deep. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't harboring any feelings about death, that I wouldn't be able to be present for others. So then I took the course, and they have a fairly rigorous certification. There's many, as I said, there's many different programs. Some you are certified over the weekend, others take years. So there's not a national certification like birth doulas. So really, it kind of comes to the point that I believe that with each doula, we bring kind of our own element to our services. And so it's really important to, if you're considering working with a doula, to, I would say most have free consultations just to get to know who they are first on the phone. And then you can have these one-on-ones. Some doulas might be more grief-based. I have this legacy component that not as many do, which I'll talk about later. There are others that use oils and are a little bit more holistic. So, I mean, I would say with any doula, they can they can show up and where their potential client is and be there for them in that space. But there might be some clients that potentially want a doula that has their CNA, that are more of a physically active kind of a doula.
Mm-hmm. So definitely customized and different to meet different roles and needs, not only of that of the family, but of the doula themselves, which I think is really smart. I love the concept of having this extra emotional support. You had mentioned about, this extra set of eyes and ears, and, I've done a lot myself with End of Life. This just is me, Lori, not in any official capacity, but I can't tell you how many times, I've stepped up or stepped in because I've seen things that the rest of the family they don't see. at all
right.
when it comes to pain and comfort and just the little things, because there's, family members so often are so overwhelmed, and many of them aren't even ready to accept that this is where they are, in the journey, and they can have literally hours to go, and they're still in denial. Right. And it
Completely.
is so helpful to have that extra set of eyes and ears, and how much people appreciate that, even if they don't in the moment, because they're just not taking it all in, what's there.
Right.
But afterwards, I know many have come to me, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, of thank you for being there, because I wasn't fully present, to take it all in. And go ahead.
No, I think that's such a valid point, because it's fascinating when I think of certain families that I've been with for, I'd say maybe the longest that I was meeting with somebody was 3 months. As far as I've worked with people on their legacies for longer, but as far as a End of Life Doula is concerned, I recently brought in a client that maybe has a bit longer than that. But on average, unfortunately, it's closer to a few weeks. They families right at the end, they feel, oh gosh, this is too much for me to handle, and there's some unresolved issues going on, and I can't get ahead of it. And so I would say, in a perfect world, doulas get involved when someone receives a terminal diagnosis, and have those conversations early on about what their healthcare directive looks like, any tweaks that they would want. So they just have these open conversations about it, and what makes life worth living for as your treatment goes on. So it's clear that they are staying in treatment because this is what they are wanting, the loved one is wanting, versus what maybe the caregiver is hoping for, or what the children are hoping for. It really, when you have these discussions, it can empower people to make decisions about life the way they want to live at that present moment, and what is on their mind and what's on the caregiver's mind. I mean, it really, to start those conversations early on, it feels like it might be difficult and more painful, which it can be, but in the big picture, it actually makes the end so much more beautiful and graceful. And not that we can't change what the wishes are and what the individual, the actively dying, will be and look like, because sometimes we just don't have control, but we have some control, which I'll go into. I say this with little trepidation, because I'm not trying to make death neat or pretty, but you really are trying to keep the fear and anxiety out of the process, so you can connect to more of the sacred nature of what's going on, right? So death doulas, we're accompanying people on this journey into the act of dying. And we're discussing symptoms on the way to make it less scary. Sometimes people have to hear things over and over. They've heard it from their hospice provider or their palliative care support staff a few times, but they need to hear it again. And so if we're there and reminding them of what these changes to the body look like, that's extremely helpful to both the loved one who's dying and the caregiver. So really, the sooner the doula can enter into the process, the more time can be spent getting to know the client and family and create this care plan, which I can talk about, and prioritize any of the needs that the family is needing. So that's done, and then you can create these sacred spaces and meaning around the death.
Well, and you had mentioned, is someone getting treatment? Are they getting treatment for themselves, or are they doing it because everyone else wants them to? And oh my gosh, that is such a struggle. I'm 62, and I've had a lot of friends pass away in the last few years, and the struggles of family and the person who is ill has just been eye-opening to me, in terms of not being able to have open conversations about their wishes. And so often I see families are so fearful of letting go, and yet it's so painful to watch the end of life, a lot of times it's cancer and the chemos and radiations, and, they're still doing all of this stuff. And, I look back and, not to judge, because every family has to do what is right for them. I'm a firm believer in that. But then the end is, I think, even more painful, because they lost a lot of quality time together. And for me, I've been lucky enough to be with people when they've passed, and it's just such an honor. It's I guess to the listeners, I would say it's not even possible for me to describe the honor it has been to be with people when they pass, and to give them that permission to go and just support them on their journey the way they've supported me. And again, there's such fear wrapped around the end of life, and yet we all know we're coming in and we're going out. There's no permanent sticker for any of us here, and so if we can make this a more peaceful, calm, appreciative journey, and really honor our relationships, I don't think there's anything more beautiful, to be honest with you, other than a birth of a child.
Right. No, I agree. And, it depends on the scenario. I mean, there are these rituals that can help take some of that fear out of death if a family member or the loved one is still struggling with regrets and unresolved issues, guilt or shame, that there are rituals that can happen after a loved one has passed with the siblings or the spouse, or we can do something where it happens even before actively dying, so they really can feel like they're a bit more present, and that they've said what they needed to say. And that it doesn't mean that it always happens. I like I said in the beginning, I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I remember my first client, pro bono, I had to really learn the hard way that he was going to fight the fact that he was dying from brain cancer at a really young age, and that until I'd say just a few days before he died. And it was really only one time after I had met with him a dozen times and recorded messages for his sons and his daughter and his wife, which were about his values and things that he wanted to be remembered by. But he never directly said, "I'm dying." It was always like, "But I'm gonna keep fighting." He never said, "I'm gonna beat this thing," but he was not willing to give up. And I just had to let that go, knowing that he ultimately had to come to a place on his own. So that is part of that first phase. I'd say there's kind of three phases that sometimes doulas look at, and that first phase is about empowering the people to make decisions about life and what they're wanting, and to hold this space. The hope is that we offer sort of an extended period of support with this personalized attention to what the family is needing. And sometimes that means you're a bit of a kind of a house manager, where sometimes you right away, if there's family members that are just not sure about your presence, you maybe act more of like kind of a meal planner, or you're coordinating, when the spouse can get a massage, or you're just sort of like keeping a pulse on the house. Like if there's somebody there that wants you and that welcomes you in, as far as the doula goes, that's great. But sometimes it takes a little time to really, for a family to get comfortable. And other times you step right in and they basically say like, "Oh my gosh, where have you been all my life?" Like in that first phase, we talk about in an ideal world, where does this loved one want to be when they're actively dying? Do they want to be home, and what will that environment look like? Do they want to have a certain smell? Do they want to have a particular sound going on? Would they like to be read to? Do they want their representatives from their church choir to come in and sing? Do they want their body to be washed? Questions about how many visitors they might want to have, or if they know that, and I say if they know, they might have feelings initially, what they project how they'll feel when they're dying, and those can completely go out the window. And they might just say, for that whole plan, I just need to know that I'm feeling comfort, and that I've already said what I need to say, and I'm not holding on for anybody else. But if they have direct ideas about who they're wanting to be in that space, it's really helpful. So me, myself, as a doula, that I know that the spouse is staying up all night coordinating when the aunt is coming in, that I can do some of that work. So really you're wanting the care provider to be more of a family member or a best friend or a partner versus having to be that care provider in an ideal world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you talked about just real specifics, like what do they want around them, from sounds and smells, and even people, who's their inner circle, who's, and at what level. All of those things are so important and so often overlooked, I think, in terms of the conversation. And I just think it's just critical for people to go into. And some people might think, well, why would I need to know that? And it's like, because it's all about comfort. And, all of these different aspects of our senses come into play with that. And I think when people are in trauma and fear and denial, they forget what creates comfort for themselves. And that's a really good thing to know, too.
Right, yeah. And sometimes the comfort is not even for the person who's dying. I mean, they might have, maybe they've been bedbound and they really have not woken up in a few weeks, and they know that there's maybe not many more days to go. Then my job is a little bit more about, let's say there's sort of one family member that's the main caregiver, and we all know that there's family dynamics in each family, and for that loved one to know, or I'm sorry, for that caregiver to know that if they step away from this room in a facility where their, let's say, father is at, and that they're nervous, so that something's going to happen, like that another sibling's going to come in and maybe just break down, or if there is, a friend that might show up that will say something that they're afraid that it's just going to change the energy. Well, then we discuss, okay, how can we work through that, and how can we communicate to others visiting that this is what the wishes are with entering the room. That Gloria would like you to take your shoes off, say a prayer of gratitude, take a deep breath, and then please enter the room. Maybe even write something down in the memory book aside from mom's bed. Or obviously maybe not everybody knows, but hearing is often the last to go. So having conversations with the friend who's dying, but maybe taking all of the details about medication and about things that are, stressors outside of the room. So it really continues to be a sacred space and one that represents this individual's life.
Yeah, I love that. Now, you said that there were kind of 3 steps in the care plan, and I think we kind of got to the first one, but maybe they were meshed together and I didn't break them out. So the first one is really kind of that 3 to 1 month before an expected death, where we're getting the vigil plan ready. We talk about what the family's involvement might be. It's a time for a doula to make sure the choices around actively dying have been discussed, and that people have an understanding of what also these signs and symptoms look like during that time, of how the body is shutting down. So it's in that preparation. Sometimes there's enough time to create a bit of a legacy, if that means, I'll dive into that more as I said, but that there's some audio recording, or there's a memory book, or even I can help loved ones write sort of their heart will letter. So if there's letters to be written to grandchildren or family members, friends, that we can have time to sort that out, and I can write it out for the individuals that can be given at later time, or even just what they want their last thoughts to be, to how they want them to be communicated, and what they want to say to others. That maybe that is something that will be a part of their
life celebration, or maybe that's just what they need to get off their chest before continuing to more of the actively dying. So it's really getting in touch and making sure that both the family members and the loved one are feeling like they have said their piece about what they're wanting at the end, and how they viewed their life and the legacy that they're leaving behind. So the second phase is truly about the vigil and the actively dying support. So the doula's main focus is to carry out the plan that the loved one and caregiver created in ways that support their vision. The vigil can last anywhere from 2 to 6 days. It can be a week or longer, or just 24 hours. And again, a doula continues to share the signs and symptoms that the body is going through. We also, I didn't talk about this very much in phase 1, but we can do guided imagery and healing touch. I've been trained in healing touch, so that's something that is just nice to have in my back pocket if it's something where a family member or the loved one is feeling that they need to remove some of that energy and allow for that time for them to move into their next end of life for as far as the last few days go. We also continue to work on rituals or ceremony with the family if it's something that they're needing. And a doula can be present for all of it. A doula can be present for the death if that's important. I have to say, it feels like often when I've been hired, a family will say, no, we want you around for the death. And the hope really is that you give the family enough tools where they don't necessarily need me. I'm a phone call away, or I can show up right after death if it happens suddenly, or if they want to have a doula there. The beauty is that in this community, there's enough doulas that are trained now that I can have a doula backup. Let's say I reached my max of 10 hours and I need to go crash, and there might be a night end of life doula for a night shift. So that's something that, again, it can shift. They can have a plan, and someone can pass much more soon than we anticipated, and so we speed things up with how I can help them. And then the third phase is really, just to step back, actually, the last part of the second phase, I'd say, depending on what the family is wanting, some of the most beautiful moments I've seen is I might show up right after death if it's something that they didn't necessarily need me there, and I guide them through a simple washing the body ritual where there might be singing or crying or laughter, and not necessarily washing every inch of their loved one's body, but maybe it's their face and hands and feet, and talking about what those body parts gave to their lives, be it, their fingers of all the many minutes of sewing dresses for their grandchildren or their children, or their, someone's feet who stood next to the soccer field for years, or their brain for being an incredible principal. You really have a time to honor that spirit that some believe are still in the room, and whatever your beliefs are, it's both for the loved one to know if they are lingering that they're being held, and also to honor again and to be present for those feelings that are sometimes just so often so raw for the family members that have just experienced their loved one dying. So that's a really beautiful ritual and ceremony that it can be very personal too. You can use the same like a certain flower that might be the loved one's favorite scent, or certain oils. So that's something that we can facilitate, as well as bodies that are wanting to be at home for more than a few hours. There's no law that says in Minnesota that a body needs to be removed. It's 3 days that you can have a body on ice. So depending on what you're wanting, people sometimes have full-on parties to 24 hours after their loved one has died, with people visiting, and that really opens up an opportunity for people to continue to celebrate this person's life together.
Okay.
And then the third phase is after death, where I help to reprocess and provide any grief support that's needed. So depending on the scenario, sometimes I meet with a client a week after. Sometimes it's 3 to 6 weeks after their loved one has passed. And you really begin to reprocess what the last few months looked like. Doulas often share their impressions of what the vigil and moments that the family might not have noticed were about. I think there's all these little nuances and beautiful signs that you don't want to interrupt the process. And so for a doula just to take notes and let it all happen naturally, it's lovely for a family to discuss what were some of the things that a doula noticed. And we might continue to use imagery, or we can even write letters of forgiveness, or do some legacy work with families depending on what their needs are. Or you can, if you know that they're needing more than what you offer, you can provide them with contacts for additional grief support, or even contacts for mediums that if they're really wanting to get in touch with their loved one, if there was more to say. We advise waiting at least a month or so for that, but it's something that can be really helpful, knowing that if there were unfinished business. And sometimes it's literally writing out thoughts and wishes and burning them outside their back patio together, but continuing to hold space for families. Yeah, so and that's really, a lot of people are like, what does this mean, holding space? It's our ultimate goal to create the safe environment where the dying and their families can express themselves and feel their emotions and work through issues with authenticity and encourage. So that's something that I would say holding space means to me. Mm-hmm. And when we have this rapport with the clients, the hope is that the loved ones can just trust our non-judgmental approach for care and be vulnerable with us. So we're not trying to change the situation, but it's almost finding kind of this new breath that families can be using when they're going into this time in their lives. Okay.
Wonderful. Gosh, you've given us such great information. I can't believe we only have, about 15 minutes left already. I do want to touch on, because there was a beautiful article written about your mom and her choice in terms of end of life. Can you tell people a little bit about that? And, of course, you were mentioned in that as well. Just that journey of making choice.
Mm-hmm. Of course. So when I took the Speaking of Dying workshop 4 years ago, one of the books on the list of recommended reading was called Choosing to Die by Phyllis Schrackner, and you can pull that up online. And it was really new to me, this idea that Phyllis explains. She shares her story, which is that her spouse is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I believe he had lost his first wife to Alzheimer's, and he was devastated. And they thought, how are we going to go about this? As many people might know, that death with dignity is not something that is an option for Alzheimer's, because to use death with dignity, which is not legal in the state, but think about 14 or 15 other states in the country, you have to have a doctor's note basically saying that you will be dying most likely in the next 6 months. So that's something, and you also have to know, more importantly really, is that the person who has the disease can cognitively say, yes, I want to take the death with dignity drug. And anybody with Alzheimer's cognitively will not be able to make any kind of decision like that if a doctor foresees their death in 6 months from that time. So death with dignity is not an option. Alan and Phyllis heard about VSED. And VSED is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It's an effective way to hasten death by fasting from food and water, ultimately. And when I read this book, I thought, oh gosh, this is after my uncle had died, but I thought, Mom might want to know about this option. And I handed her the book, and she used to be an avid reader. She doesn't read very much anymore, but she said, no question, if I have Alzheimer's, which I think she kind of had a feeling she did a few years before she was diagnosed. She said, this is how I want to die. She had seen her brother really go through, as many do, not all, but he had Lewy bodies, and his dementia. He was one of those really active physical humans that there wasn't a lot of calmness to his dementia, and he just fought it. And there was such sadness that we would witness and be a part of, and it wasn't how my uncle would have ever wanted to go for a good 2 years, if not 3 years, at the end of his life. And so right now, that was about 2.5 years ago that that Mom has been diagnosed, and VSED has been a part of the conversation. So right away, we met with her healthcare provider and the hospice team and said, this is our hope. This is something that you could support. And they were on board. You don't necessarily, you don't need to be terminally ill to use VSED. It's not required for an individual to have that, but it does help for medical or other support to provide comfort and care at the end. Any story that I've read, it really makes sense, if you can, to have hospice on board and then have private care, because it's something where, yes, people decide to stop eating and drinking on their own, and they don't necessarily call it VSED. But if it's something where, at this point, Mom knows in the back of her mind, okay, just to back up, we made this kind of massive list of things that if she could no longer do, she would be closer to starting the VSED process. And so that list has become a little bit smaller. She can no longer play music or play the bells. She doesn't drive. She has a hard time using her phone. She doesn't cook. But she still is presently like an active participant with her community and her friends. And she has highs and lows for sure. And travel is not easy. And her spouse helps her with clothes. But she still can be alone for a period of time at home without kind of getting worried. Her anxiety is not too high. But she can't really be involved in conversations for too long. And my mom is a talker, and she wants to be in the conversation. And so for my mom, when that continues to slow down and when she no longer wants to go out to dinner or have walks around the lake, then we will know. It's really my role, my sister's role, my mom's husband's role, to keep noticing how, the window of Mom being able to start VSED, because she has to be the one that says, I want to start. And once we start, if she asks for food and drink, we have to provide it to her. So we want to be able to honor her wish by ultimately catching her at a time where she understands why she started VSED and why she continues to stay on it. So with that in mind, I've recorded videos of her and statements of her stating that why she wants to use the VSED process is on her 5 wishes. It's on another signed document. But I'll record another short video right before we start the process that will remind Mom, if she does ask and gets confused, why this process has started, which that could happen. You never know. It's never a guarantee. That she'll have the opportunity to say, oh, that's right. That's why I'm doing it. No, I don't want any water. Or she'll say, that's right. Screw it. I don't want to do this anymore. I love life too much. I'm not ready. But we'll see. We can only do so much to prepare, but we've right now we're kind of in this phase where one of the most challenging parts is that my mom loves a good party and she loves to see friends. So she definitely wants to have some kind of gathering before she dies, but it's a little bit of that like, okay, not knowing if it's going to be a year from now or 6 months from now. Do we do something small, large, inside, outside? So that Mom was so touched by the fact that this article was in, a fairly large newspaper in the Twin Cities, so people can learn about options, and that's so important to her. But it also just brings up the attention around what's going on even more. So it's challenging.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I can only imagine. Gosh, we've covered so much ground here, and but I think it's good for people to look at these options and consider. I mean, plans can always change later on down the road. Like you said, if someone changes their mind, it's about them and what they want in the moment, and it's hard to project for a lot of people what their choices are going to be when the door of death is that close. And so,
right.
I know I've made comments that, if I get cancer, I'll probably choose not to do treatment, just because I've seen so many people struggle, and I'd rather have quality of life as long as I can. And, but I could, I get that diagnosis and I might totally change my mind. It's hard to say. We do have a caller on the line. Let me just see. Sometimes people just call in to listen too, but let me check.
Sure.
I think this is Kate. Kate, this is Lori. Are you there?
I am listening.
You are.
I am listening.
Well,
it's very interesting.
Yeah. Do you have any questions at all? We've got a few minutes left, and I just wanted to pull you in case you had a question or comment.
I've never heard of a doula working with older people. I always thought that a doula helps deliver babies, and so this is very interesting to me. All the subjects that Lori has covered, I've never heard it. I mean, I know it, but then I've never heard it from a doula. So, are there many kinds of doulas out there other than the ones that are midwives or whatever that they do?
From what I know, the doulas that I have seen in this country, there are birth doulas and death doulas. So we're really we're doing very similar things with families as far as making this really one of the most impactful moments in people's lives, their death and their birth, something where it's an honor for this person who's being involved to that is the pregnant woman or the person who's dying, to have control and to have a say about what they're wanting, and it's just to give families extra support in either way. It's a Greek word, douling, and it means giving support. But it is, I have to say the Minnesota Death Collaborative started about 3 years ago, and if you wanted to check out a list of all different kind of death doulas that give specifics on what our specialties are, I encourage anyone just to Google Minnesota Death Collaborative. We have monthly presentations that are about anything from writing obituaries to green burials to VSED. So I think my gut and hope is similar to birth doulas 20 years ago when that name started coming around. Death doula will become a little bit more comfortable. And also just a reminder, these are roles that for hundreds of years people were doing naturally, and there was not a name for it necessarily, because it really birth doulas aren't midwives. They're not delivering babies. They're supporting midwives. And like death doulas, we're not doing the medical or like birth doulas, we're not the medical side of it. That would be hospice as far as any kind of medication and such. But for both, it's truly, I think, because of the beauty and the difficultness of our healthcare world in the 40s and 50s was that death was changing. It was people were coming back from the war, and they were their bodies were needing to be sterile for long enough so people could see them. So bodies weren't being buried right away, and they really weren't being honored in the capacity of a family being with a body. And at the same time, there was just this, all of these incredible operations and treatments were being studied for years and years and years, and people's lives were continuing to extend longer than they would 100 years ago. That said, sometimes people forget that they don't have to continue to use all of these options at the end. So I think that is also a reason why death doulas came to be, to discuss that, because before death doulas, because there wasn't really enough a death doula, it was maybe a wife's best friend that would come and prepare, the water that a body would be washed at, or would talk about, have conversations around death. I mean, I think for years there were young children that would be around death more than birth, and now it's a little bit opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really kind of, I mean, I do think that in certain ways there's just kind of this resurgence and a bit of a groundswell around the end of life community. There seems to be this gap in honoring those at the end of their path. And so I think people are needing to be reminded of how to companion at death, and that's a big part of it.
Exactly.
Sure.
No, Wendy, I want to...
children. I think sorry, Laurie, just one second, okay?
Okay.
And I'm going to sign off. I've seen little children going to visitations here, and I was like, well, the kids are so little, Why do you bring kids to visitations? Is that a good thing for the kid, or is that not quite a good thing? Because back home, the wake was in a house normally. Though in those days, I haven't been home in 30 years. And then so we know that somebody is dead and somebody is in that casket. But here, I don't know why. When I came here, it's a different thing. When I see kids coming to the visitation and look in the casket and run around, and I always thought that, don't you think that the kids are too young? But actually, what is too young to go to a visitation when in my culture they could see it at home, But it seems like there is a difference somehow.
Right. It's a longer discussion for sure, but I do believe that it's such a personal choice. But I hear more regrets of children that didn't go to their grandparents' funeral and being a part of that than I've never heard of, it's too bad that I brought my children to this. They shouldn't have seen it. It was too painful. Obviously, there's moments where if somebody is in pain at the end, or you want to honor a child if they're just scared to see their father, on his last breath, or on his deathbed. But I think the more that you approach it, and this is part of life's journey, and that they don't have, kids understand much more, I think, and can handle much more than what our society believes they can about death.
I totally agree. My mom used to get scolded for bringing us, and her friends would say they're too young, and she's like, they're not too young to see a birth and to celebrate a birth. They should never be too young to celebrate a death and to honor a loved one. And so she was very, very adamant about that. But we do need to wrap up here, and I want to make sure that, that Wendy, that we get your contact information out to people. So do you want to give out your website and contact?
Yep, my website, it's my Shemed, M-Y, M as in mother, Y, C, H as in Harry, E, M as in mother, I as in igloo, N as in Nancy.com. My Shemed, I know it's kind of a funny word. It's pathways in French. And my phone number is 612-282-8644. My email address is wendy@myshemed.com. I encourage everyone also to look at the Minnesota Death Collaborative for lists of other doulas and death educators and celebrants. And I feel so fortunate to be able to have this time to be sharing what doulas do and just continue to provide people options of how to go about this time of supporting loved ones in life. And we're here for the long haul. I think most doulas that start this role, they probably will be doing it even in some fashion until they no longer can. I think it's in your bones. As I realized when I became a doula, it was sort of like, this this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think those that become doulas it's fairly intuitive, and that's what you're looking for when you're considering a doula.
I do want to add in that we have the International End of Life Doula website listed, and if you can get me the Minnesota Death Collaborative, I will add that link as well, so that people have that. So thank you, everyone, so much for participating. Kate, thanks for calling in. Really appreciate this conversation. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you for sharing.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebestier, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday, without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.